Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are stripping away the tinsel from a story we all think we know, Charles Dickens's 1843 novella, A Christmas Carol. You know the story, you know the moral, but our mission today is really to look at the source material. We want to find out why this book exists, how it was written, and why the ultimate story of generosity was actually born out of Dickens's desperate personal need for money, intense social fury, and ultimately, well, resulted in a financial disaster for him.
It's quite the historical irony, isn't it? The book itself, officially titled A Christmas Carol, in prose, being a ghost story of Christmas, came out December 19th, 1843, and it appeared right as the Victorians were embracing this huge revival in Christmas culture, carols, cards, Queen Victoria making the Christmas tree popular. Dickens wanted to tap into that, but personally, he was facing an absolute crisis.
Okay, let's focus on that crisis. Dickens was already a huge literary star by then, but 1843 was shaping up to be financially disastrous. Just how bad was it?
Oh, very bad, yeah. His most recent novel, Martin Chuzzlewit, which was being serialized, it was a failure. Sales were just so disappointing that his publishers, Chapman and Hall, they actually threatened to reduce his monthly income significantly.
Wow.
Yeah, things didn't improve. And, compounding all that personal stress, his wife, Catherine, was pregnant with their fifth child. He needed to smash it, and fast.
It sounds like the book was written with, well, a gun to his head, financially speaking.
That urgency, you can feel it in the writing itself. He wrote the entire novella in just 6 weeks. It's often described as being written at white heat.
6 weeks. That's incredible.
It really is. And he wasn't just sitting at his desk. He'd take these incredibly long night walks, like 15, 20 miles around London, basically composing the chapters in his head. He was pushing himself to the absolute limit, channeling both his stress and his really profound social anger into this story.
That distinction is important, isn't it? The personal financial pressure on one hand, and this deep social anger on the other. Where did that fury come from?
Well, it was lifelong for him, really. It stemmed from this deep foundational rage rooted right in his own childhood. When he was only 12, his father was sent to debtor's prison.
Right, the Marshalsea.
Exactly. And that forced young Charles to leave school and work in this horrible, dirty, rat-infested shoe-blacking factory, Warren's Blacking Warehouse. That memory, that intimate experience of poverty, it just never left him.
And the sources show that the immediate spark, sort of catalyst for A Christmas Carol specifically, came from him seeing poverty on a much grander industrial scale more recently.
Precisely. His anger really boiled over after 2 significant visits he made. First, he toured the Cornish tin mines. I was just appalled by the conditions, especially for the children working there. And that was almost immediately followed by a visit to the Field Lane Ragged School in London. This was a place for, well, half-starved, illiterate street children. And all this exposure, it coincided with him reading the 1843 second report of the Children's Employment Commission. It detailed the brutal effects of the Industrial Revolution on young workers. He was so incensed, his first thought was actually to write a political pamphlet.
Really? A pamphlet?
Yeah, tentatively titled An Appeal to the People of England on Behalf of the Poor Man's Child.
Would have been, well, probably forgotten pretty quickly.
Almost certainly. But he changed his mind, literally at the last minute. He realized that a deeply felt Christmas story, a narrative, could be a sledgehammer to convey his message about poverty and injustice. Something with, as he put it, 20,000 times the force of a dry political argument. He needed to open hearts, not just, win a debate.
And he found that opening by structuring the book like music, using those 5 staves. Now, we all basically know the plot, the sequence of the ghosts, but maybe skipping the pure summary. Which details did Dickens really pack in there to drive home that social message? Why do you think those bits sometimes get lost in modern adaptations?
That's a great question. The crucial details are off of the sharp little jabs at Victorian social policy and attitudes. For instance, in Stave 2, when the ghost of Christmas past shows why Belle, Scrooge's fiancée, broke off their engagement. It wasn't just that he'd become mean or greedy. She explicitly says she watched his love for her get replaced by a different passion, money. She saw a master passion gain engross him. That grounds his miserliness in a very real emotional loss. It's not just cartoon villainy.
And the social critique just explodes in Stave 3 with the Ghost of Christmas Present.
Oh, absolutely. That's where the sledgehammer really hits.
Yeah.
The spirit shows the Cratchit's humble feast, Tiny Tim's precarious health. But the key moment, the one that often gets softened, is when the ghost lifts his robe.
Ignorance and want.
Exactly. Those 2 terrifying, emaciated children. And the spirit specifically warns Scrooge to beware the boy. Ignorance above all. That's a very direct message from Dickens.
Then the ultimate psychological weapon is Stave 4, the ghost of Christmas yet to come, showing the fate of this unmourned man and, heartbreakingly, the Cratchit family mourning Tiny Tim. But what's really fascinating, getting into the characters themselves. While the structure is brilliant, the characters weren't purely original creations, were they?
No, not entirely. They're more like a tapestry, woven from Dickens' memories, his observations, and frankly, his rage. Ebenezer Scrooge himself, for example, he was a complex synthesis. He definitely borrowed traits from famous real-life misers like John Ellies and Jemmy Wood.
Yeah.
But the emotional core, that complex mix of bitterness and potential for change, seems to come from Dickens's own very conflicted feelings about his own father.
Right, and the sources show his fury was also very targeted, aimed at specific Victorian philosophies floating around at the time.
Absolutely. Scrooge's most callous lines, are there no prisons?
Right.
And the union workhouses. Those weren't just random cruelty. They were almost lifted directly from the rhetoric of the day. They specifically targeted the ideas of the demographer Thomas Malthus, whose theories basically suggested that helping the poor just encouraged them to have more children and worsen poverty.
So Malthusian ideas.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it was also a sarcastic nod to the philosopher Thomas Carlyle, who often raised similar sorts of dismissive questions about state assistance. Dickens was essentially using Scrooge as a mouthpiece for the cruelest elements of Victorian economic thought, only to then completely dismantle that philosophy through Scrooge's transformation.
That explains the philosophical origin, but what about the name itself? I love the story about the tombstone. Is that true?
It seems to be. It's one of those great, possibly apocryphal, but wonderful accidents in literary history. Apparently, Dickens was walking through a graveyard in Edinburgh and saw a tombstone for one Ebenezer Scrooge, who was a corn merchant. Dickens later said he misread the inscription, possibly the bit describing Scrooge's profession as mean man. Now, historical records suggest Scrooge was actually known as a rather jovial and kindly man, maybe even a bit of a libertine. But that misreading, mean man, stuck in Dickens's head and gave us the name Scrooge.
Incredible. The influence just keeps stacking up. Marley's chains, that iconic image. Where did that come from?
That seems to have a very specific visual inspiration. In 1842, Dickens had visited the Western Penitentiary in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania during his American tour.
Right.
And he was profoundly disturbed, really affected, by seeing the prisoners held in chains, fettered. That visual trauma seems to have directly translated into Jacob Marley's spectral punishment chains, forged link by link from his own greedy actions in life.
And Tiny Tim, the emotional heart of the story for so many people.
Tiny Tim was very real in a sense. He was closely based on Dickens's own nephew, Henry Burnett Jr. Henry was disabled exactly how it isn't perfectly clear, maybe rickets or polio, and he was 5 years old when Dickens was writing the novella. That personal connection adds another layer of poignancy.
So this incredibly intense 6-week sprint, fueled by personal anxiety, social indignation, real people, misread tombstones, it produces this absolute masterpiece of literature. Now, here comes the biggest irony, the one we hinted at up front. The book was a genuine, immediate, spectacular success. The entire first run, 6,000 copies, sold out by Christmas Eve, 1843. So if it was such a massive hit, how on earth did it almost financially ruin him?
This is the great publication paradox. Dickens, the guy who desperately needed money, who'd just been threatened with a pay cut, he paradoxically insisted on absolutely top-tier, really expensive production values for the book.
Why?
He envisioned it as a beautiful object, a festive gift in itself. He demanded this specific red cloth binding, gilt-edged pages and these really vibrant hand-colored illustrations by John Leech. And initially, he wanted festive green end papers.
And those end papers caused immediate problems, didn't they? I read something about that.
They did. The binder used the wrong process, and the green came out this sort of dull, muddy olive color. Completely ruined the festive look Dickens wanted. They had to scrap them, rework the title page in red and blue to compensate, and switch to yellow end papers instead. All of this caused delays and, crucially, added substantial costs to the printing.
So high costs must mean low profit.
Exactly. Dickens had been banking on making at least £1,000 from the first printing. He desperately needed that money. But because of all these high production costs he'd insisted on, he only ended up making £230.
Ouch. £230 instead of £1,000.
A tiny fraction of what he expected. He was bitterly disappointed, and it completely soured his relationship with his publishers, Chapman and Hall. He actually broke with them shortly afterwards because of it.
But the real financial dagger wasn't just the low profit margin, it was the piracy, right?
Oh, that was the true catastrophe. The story was so instantly popular that pirate printers immediately started churning out cheap illicit copies. Condensed versions were being sold on the street for as little as tuppence.
So people could get the story without buying his expensive version?
Pretty much. Dickens, furious, sued one firm, Parley's Illuminated Library, for copyright infringement, and he won the court case. Victory.
Okay, so where's the disaster?
The disaster was that the publishers he sued promptly declared bankruptcy, which meant they couldn't pay the damages or Dickens' legal costs. So Dickens was left on the hook for his own legal fees, which amounted to £700.
Wait, let me get this straight. He won the lawsuit against the pirates, but he had to pay £700, which was more than 3 times what he'd actually earned from the legitimate first printing just for the privilege of winning.
That's exactly it. He bankrupted himself defending his own bestseller. He won the moral and legal war against piracy, but he personally lost the financial battle spectacularly. It almost proves Scrooge right in a twisted way in the short term. Valuing money above all else sometimes seems safer.
Wow, that is just stunning. Despite that huge personal cost to Dickens, though, the cultural impact was immediate and undeniable. The reviews were glowing, right? William Makepeace Thackeray called it a national benefit.
Absolutely. And the sources, the records from the time, confirmed the book inspired tangible, real-world change almost straight away. Now, academics still debate whether the story is primarily a secular celebration of, family home generosity, or if it's fundamentally a Christian allegory about spiritual redemption.
What points to the religious angle?
Well, things like the description of Marley having no bowels. That sounds odd to us, but it's a direct biblical reference to the bowels of compassion in the King James Bible. So there are definite theological undertones if you look for them.
But regardless of that debate, the social consequences were pretty clear and immediate.
Undeniably.
Yeah.
The Gentleman's Magazine, a prominent publication at the time, attributed a noticeable rise in charitable donations across Britain in early 1844, directly to the influence of the novella. People read it and felt moved to act.
And that effect lasted.
It really did. Decades later, the story's power was still potent. There's a famous story about an American businessman, Mr. Fairbanks, of the Fairbanks Scales Company, who heard Dickens perform a public reading in Boston in 1867. He was so moved that he closed his factory on Christmas Day, which wasn't standard practice then, and sent every single one of his employees a turkey. It really helped solidify that link between Christmas and social responsibility, or at least generosity from employers.
And linguistically, the ghost story is still shaping how we talk today.
Oh, completely. It massively popularized the phrase Merry Christmas. It gave us da humbug, which everyone still understands. And of course, the name Scrooge became, and still is, the universal shorthand for a miser. It was so ingrained that it was officially added to the Oxford English Dictionary in 1982.
That's incredible staying power.
And what's also fascinating is how the story's core message keeps getting reshaped by adaptations. It's Dickens' most adapted work by far. And those films, plays, cartoons, they often subtly change things to reflect the concerns of their own time.
How sweet.
Well, for example, during the Great Depression in the 1930s, some film versions really leaned into portraying Bob Cratchit not just as this poor, meek clerk, but almost as an anti-capitalist figure, subtly critiquing the system that kept him down.
Right, so the interpretation shifts with the era. And as a result, the story that many of us remember today isn't always exactly the story Dickens originally wrote.
No, often it isn't. Because of decades of adaptations, certain scenes that were never in the book feel like they were. The most common one is Scrooge showing up dramatically at the Cratchit's house on Christmas Day, laden with a giant turkey and presents.
That's not in the book?
Nope. In the original text, Scrooge sends the turkey anonymously via a delivery boy. His reconciliation with the Cratchits happens the next day, Boxing Day, in his office, where he gives Bob a raise and sincerely promises to help his family, becoming a second father to Tiny Tim. The original ending emphasizes ongoing change and commitment, not just one grand, public gesture.
So we've learned that the most famous, most beloved story of Christmas generosity was born from Dickens hitting financial rock bottom. It was driven by his fury at social injustice, meticulously crafted, and then it almost ruined him financially because of expensive paper and rampant piracy. It's a truly stunning paradox.
It really is. And if we circle back to his original goal, using this ghost story as that political sledgehammer, Dickens was explicitly warning Victorian society to beware of those allegorical children, ignorance and want above all others. He saw them as the greatest threats. So maybe this raises an important question for you, the listener, to think about. If Dickens were writing A Christmas Carol today, right now, in our modern world, hyper-connected, awash in information, yet still facing huge inequalities, which figure do you think he would warn us to beware of most urgently? Ignorance or want? Think about the implications of that choice, especially in our current information age. What does that warning mean for us now?
A very deeply felt question indeed. Something to ponder. We'll see you for the next deep dive.